All right, you'll hear the introduction in the next little segment. There was a couple things I forgot to mention during the video that a lot of people may not know. Now, when it comes to the flour for your pie crust, a ton of people say you should put your flour through a sifter into the bowl that you're going to make your dough into. I do not do this. I have never noticed a difference in my crust by running it through a sifter, as opposed to just dumping it into the bowl with the salt and shortening. 2, a lot of people say you should load your measuring cup with a spoon when you're putting flour into the measuring cup. I do not. We keep our flour in a big old Tupperware container. I just scoop it. Once again, never noticed a difference in the crust. So, just wanted to make that clear. Another thing I want to make clear is whether you scoop it like me or whether you load it with a spoon, you want the measuring cup to be heaping with flour. And then you take a butter knife, a table knife, lay it flat on the handle of the measuring cup, and you run it flat over the top of the measuring cup to knock off the excess. That is the way you get a full cup of flour. So I wanted to make sure that I included that in here because, like I said, I forgot to put it in when I was making the crust. You know, you get talking and going with so many different things, it can be kind of hard to tend to everything. So you don't always think of everything. So I wanted to include that here. So enjoy the video. Hello and welcome back to These Blind Eyes 6580. Don't forget to subscribe and to like. We'll see if I can make it through this video today. So, blueberry pie. Now you're going to ask yourself, if I'm trying to show easy things for blind people to make, why am I doing a pie? The reason is the filling's easy to make and you can buy your own pre-made pie crust. It will require a top and a bottom, just so you are aware of that. So, as far as utensils, there's going to be a couple things you're going to need. One of these things, if I can find them, I don't know why in the heck all of a sudden I can't find these things. I can now. For those who cannot see, I've got what is called a bench scraper. It's a flat piece of metal with a wooden handle. This will get up under the pie crust after it has been rolled out. The other thing is called a pastry knife. It is shaped like the stirrup on a saddle. So it's got a handle and then it goes down and curves around and comes back up to the other end of the handle. On the other side, underside of it, is 4 curved blades. Now the blades aren't sharp. They're dull. But this is what you're going to use to bind your shortening with your flour when you're going to make your crust. So I'll put that stuff back down over here. Okay, things that you'll need to do starting off. Preheat your oven to 425. The second thing is you're going to need a third of a cup of shortening for each crust, the bottom and the top. Now, you can either get a can of Crisco's vegetable shortening and use a measuring cup, which you will need to scoop it out with your hand and put it into the measuring cup. If you try to scoop it out of the can, there's a very good chance you will break the handle off of your measuring cup Ask me how I know this. Another thing you can do is Crisco sticks. Now the thing is a Crisco stick is a full cup. It's not like a stick of butter that's something like a half a cup or something like that. It's a full cup, and so you can cut it into thirds. It's not going to be exact. For some reason, it's like 5 inches. Why they didn't think that went out better, I don't know. But they weren't thinking about blind people not being able to see the line. They were thinking about people who can see the line. It's a little over 1.5 inches to get a third of a cup. When you get it cut, stack them. See which is the biggest. Use the biggest ones for your crusts. Now the smallest one, I have at room temperature. The other two are sitting in the refrigerator right now. They've been in there for a few hours, stiffening up some. Because you want your crust, you want the shortening to be cold. If it is cold and you use ice water when you go to mix it in the dough, it helps keep the shortening in its own form. That way when it takes longer to heat up in the oven, and that is what's going to give you your flaky crust. It allows it to separate. So keep that in mind. So I've got 2 different 1/3 cup segments of a Crisco vegetable shortening stick in the fridge. I've got the other one at room temperature in my pie dish. It's what I'm going to grease it with. The other stuff you'll need. You will need a cup of flour and about 1/2 teaspoon of salt to go into each pie crust, the bottom and the top. 1 cup of flour, 1/2 teaspoon of salt. For the filling, you will need 4 cups of blueberries. And I already have the other mixture in a bowl just waiting. And it is 3/4 of a cup of sugar. It is 1 teaspoon of salt. It is 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. And it is 3 tablespoons of cornstarch. That can be a unique product. Not everybody's going to have cornstarch, so that is something you'll have to get if you're wanting to make some pies like this. The purpose of the cornstarch is to bind the blueberries together, so they don't just spill out when you get a piece. I mean, you're obviously going to have some that do anyway. But I've got that in a bowl, separate bowl that's already mixed, just waiting to be dumped into stirred into the blueberries. I've got a cup of flour and 1/2 teaspoon of salt in a bowl, just waiting for 1/3 of a cup of the cold shortening. I've got a cup of ice water behind me. My oven's already at 425 degrees. So I saved the piece of paper that came off of this section of shortening, the shortening stick. The one that I left at room temperature and have in the pie pan. Now when you grease something, you're smashing it a little bit. You're just wiping it around the bottom, around the edges. You want it covered. That's what greasing a dish is, when they tell you to grease something. Whether you're making a cake or baking the pie, you have to grease it. Otherwise, whatever you're making is going to stick to the dish. So that's the purpose behind it. Now, I'm not going to use an entire 1/3 of a stick of shortening to grease this glass pie dish. And just for future reference, while I'm greasing this, like I said, it's just my hand smearing it around. I'm tearing off a little piece here and a little piece there, smearing it around. But while I'm doing that, every pie pan I've seen, every glass pie pan I've seen has handles. It has one on either side. So it has two handles. Alright, I think I got this just about as greased as I can get her. So the reason I saved the paper is because I got quite a bit of shortening left. This is something I can put on the paper, drop in a Ziploc bag, put in the fridge, and save for another day when I need to grease something. So right now I'm going to wash my hands, and I will be right back because it's covered with the shortening. Alright, I'm back, and right now I am unwrapping a cold third of a cup of shortening that I had sitting in the fridge, like I said, for a few hours. One thing that you're going to need that I did not mention, I guess I just assumed, which I know you should not do with folks, especially if they're learning how to cook, you're going to need a rolling pin. You don't need anything fancy. Okay, let me see here. Let me find a place to set this pie dish, get it out of my way, and get my pastry knife. Alright. It can be kind of tricky when it comes to pie crust, because you want it flaky. But one thing you don't want is for a tough pie crust. So when it comes to it, when you go to mix the dough and roll it out, you're wanting to work it as little as possible. And there are little tricks to it. Now, just so you're aware, with this pastry knife, the saddle stirrup that I described with the 4 blades, occasionally you have to use your finger to get the shortening off of the inside loop, because it works up between the blades. But back to the crust, you work it as little as possible. Right now I'm using the pastry knife to meld together the flour, the 1 cup of flour, half teaspoon of salt, and the 1/3 cup of cold Crisco vegetable shortening. Okay, let's see here. So one of the things that I learned the hard way, a friend of mine's mom had to tell me what I was doing wrong, and it took her a while to figure it out, because it was one of those things, like I said, sometimes when you get used to something, you just assume people know what they're doing in certain areas. Well, one of these areas she assumed I knew what I was doing was how much flour to put down on the surface where you roll out your pie crust. If you use too much, you will make a tough crust, because when you need just enough flour to keep it from sticking to the surface, so you can scrape it up with that bench scraper I described, the wooden handle on a flat piece of metal. So it doesn't take a lot. I usually use, like a silverware set, the middle spoon that I call a tablespoon. That's usually what I use. That's always been more than enough for me. Now I've worked this to where like all the flour and the shortening has been worked together. I don't really know how to describe it, because in a sense it feels like the shortening's just disappeared. You can pick this stuff up, and it's basically like you got clumpy flour. And that's essentially what it is, clumpy flour. But one thing that you can do as well, after you make your crust, after I make my crust, I put it in the pie plate, and then I put it in the fridge. Now I'm getting ready to add some ice water to it. You don't add a lot, you add a little at a time. The way I do it, and like I said, it's ice water, so I keep my fingers over the top of the cup to keep the ice from falling in. Just go a little at a time, because it does not take a lot of water. And it's all about texture. Like right now, I'll probably have to put another splash in, maybe, I don't know. But it'll kind of, yeah, I'm going to have to put a little bit. But it's going to stick to your hand. I'm using one hand to knead the dough. The other hand's holding the glass of ice water. And you'll just have to practice this. This is the thing, though. If you mess up a pie crust, you're out a cup of flour and a little salt and shortening. You know, it's not a massive mess up. Some of this still isn't wanting to bind, so I'm going to have to add just a touch more water. But yeah, like I said, you want to keep it cold. Just about got her. Now I have not added a lot of water, maybe 2 tablespoons. It hasn't been a lot. All right, that's how that's going to be. It's one of those things you can, it's kind of funny because when it's about right, as far as my concern, you could, if you got something sticking to your finger like some flour, you can stick it into the middle of the ball of dough, and guess what? It comes clean. All right, now, like I said, I need to get me one of those spoons and get me a little bit of flour on this space where I'm going to roll out my pie crust. I'm just spreading it around with my hand. Now I'm putting the pie dough right in the middle of it. Alright, getting the bowl out of the way. Now one thing you're going to have to do, one thing that helps keep you from working dough too much, it's in a ball right now. I'm going to push it down with my hand like I'm making a hamburger patty. Flatten it out some, starting it that way. Now, before you use your rolling pin, you have to get some flour and flour it. All that means is getting some flour in your hand and wiping it up and down your rolling pin. Another trick to keep from working it too much: start in the center, roll out. Go forward, start in the center, roll out, coming towards you, going at all angles. It helps keep from working it too much, but it also helps if you go in angles and up and down, side to side, all that kind of stuff. It helps you keep a circular form to your pie crust. Trying to think of how to describe the thickness you're going to want. Don't really know how to describe it. You definitely, it ain't going to be more than 1/8 of an inch, I can guarantee you that. By the time you get it rolled out to where it's big enough to go on into your pie plate, it's pretty thin. All right, now what I'm going to do, I am going to use the bench scraper that I've already described to start scraping up this pie crust. Back and forth, don't force it. And what I've done is I've laid my rolling pin just off center to the left of the crust, and I'm working from the right. I'm rolling this up over the pie crust. Now I've got the pie crust completely on the rolling pin. Now I got it in the pie plate. You got to be careful working it around. Because you don't want to tear the crust when you're working it. Now the edge of my glass pie plate is ribbed up toward the top. So I'm going around, I've got it in. I'm going around the edges. And making sure that it's firm up against the side, pressing it in with my fingers. At the same time, the bottom inside edge, I'm pushing down with my fingers and making sure that it is firm and flat as well. Now, if you have a little gap or something, you don't want a huge one, but if you have a little one, don't worry too much, because you're going to have a top crust that's going to go over the top of it too. And you can do the top crust any way you want. You can do it with, I'm going to grab me a knife. You can make lattice work. That's the original way I learned how to do this, was lattice work. I've just got a regular steak knife, and I'm going around the edge of the pie plate, the top edge, and cutting off excess crust right now. But you can do a whole top. I honestly haven't decided what I'm going to do yet. Fact is, with me being blind, when I cut strips out of a crust and make lattice work, it isn't pretty. It isn't uniform, But guess what? It is what it is. I've never let the looks of a pie dictate whether I was going to eat some or not, so if you want to, that's on you, Jack. Okay, I've got the crust just about how I want it. Like I said, going around the edge and trying to cut off a little excess here and there. Alrighty. Ain't the prettiest crust I've made, but guess what? I didn't work it a ton either. So put that knife to the side. Now don't forget, 4 cups of blueberries. Right now I've got the pie still sitting here on the thing, on the counter. I've already mixed up the sugar, the cornstarch, the cinnamon, and the salt. Now I'm getting a spoon so I can start mixing this. And I know I'm off camera for those of you who can see. I'm trying to adjust. What I'm doing, since there's so much of these dry ingredients, I'm not just dumping it in. I just essentially grabbed a handful, sprinkled it over the top, and now I'm stirring it in a little bit. And now I'm getting a little bit more out of the bowl and sprinkling it over the blueberries. Now I'm stirring it again, just to try to keep it consistent. Now I'm not going to make you watch me make the second crust. There's no point in that. You can watch me make the first one. And while I'm making it, now I am taking what's rest of the bowl and dumping it into the blueberries. After I get this mixed up, it's going into the original pie dish that's got the first crust in it. Then it's going to go into the fridge and stay there to keep the crust cold and keep the blueberries cold and stuff until I just get the top crust done. When the top crust is done, then it'll go. Then I'll get the pie out of the fridge, put the top crust on, and then I will put it into the oven for 50 minutes. Okay, that's mixed up pretty well. Now I'm not just gonna dump into the pie dish. I'm spooning some of this in until I get toward the bottom, just so I don't end up with a mess if I miss the pie dish. Okay, that should be good, and then I should be able to dump the rest. And that is a full, this is going to be a full pie, folks. But some of that juice is going to cook out. So I'm going to put this in the fridge, make my top pie crust, and I will be back. All right, I'm back. I got the second crust rolled out. It isn't as pretty as the first one, but it will do. So right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get it up over the rolling pin like I did before and move it to the side temporarily. It's kind of hard when you can't see and you're the only one doing the camera work. Alright, now that that's there, I'm going to grab the pie so you can kind of see what it looks like as it's filled. It's in the fridge. Now, actually, the first thing I did when I shut the camera off before I made my next crust, first thing I did, get out a cookie sheet and put aluminum foil over it. Reason being, when you got a lot of pie filling, and especially when it's got, I'm moving the pie back over to the side now so I can lay this crust out and cut it into strips, make my lattice work. It can boil over in the oven. If it does this, you don't want it going into the oven. Okay, so set this rolling pin aside. I'm gonna get me another knife. Thing is, people have all kinds of opinions on what to use and what not to use when you're cutting into crust. I just use a regular, I'm using a steak knife right now. I'm just doing it gently. I cut it gently. And the thing is, you know, when you can't see like me, you just kind of got to wing it when you're cutting the strips as far as how straight and even they are. And what I'm doing is laying it in place. I'll show it when I'm done. I can't really show it right now. But I'm laying, when I'm putting it over the spot that I want, I'm crimping it down. And then when I'm done, I will go around and I will cut it off around the edges again. So far I have 2 strips. I'm going to be off camera here, but let me see. I don't understand how the... So I'm going to have 3 strips of crust laid across the top. Actually, I may end up with 4. I don't like that gap. Yeah, I can get one more little one in there. My strips are nowhere near uniform. But guess what? I don't work at a restaurant. And if my folks want to sit and complain about how it looks, they can go without. I'll eat this shit myself. All right, so I have 4 going horizontally. Like I said, the pie pan has 2 handles on it. So I'm going to move this crust over. So if the handles are sitting, if you're facing the pie pan and they're at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock, then they're horizontal. All right, cut me another strip. I don't think I'm going to have 4 strips going from north to south, because for one thing, the handles make it hard to do the lattice work, for me anyway. Hopefully this one will be long enough. Like I said, I didn't do that good a job on this crust, but you'll have that. Sometimes you're just going to have that. So honestly, all I got real room for on the vertical side, noon to 6, is 2 strips. So I've put them all in place. Now I'm going to cut the excess edges off. It's hanging over the sides. Ain't the prettiest pie I've ever made, but guess what? Especially when you can't see, doesn't much matter what it looks like, do it. What matters is what it tastes like. My lattice work is uneven. It's not uniform, not organized, none of that good stuff. Sometimes you just have better days than others. And guess what? I'm impressed that it went as good as it did. I haven't made a blueberry pie since I lived in Milwaukee, which was over 4 years ago. And it's one of those things that, guess what? Get away from it. It can get away from you. The more you do it, the more consistent it will be. So I'm going to put this in the oven for 50 minutes, and it's at 425, don't forget. And then I'm putting it on a cookie sheet that's covered with aluminum foil, so if it spills over, it's going on the foil and not burning into a good cookie sheet. So I'll put it in the oven for 50 minutes, and then when it's done, I'll get it out and we'll take a look at it. All right, the pie is out of the oven. I hope that first clip didn't throw you off too much. It was just I figured I'd include that stuff about the flour that I didn't say during the video. Now, I will say about this pie, I have not tasted it yet, but typically you gotta watch to make sure a crust isn't browning too fast. And so if it starts to brown too fast, you can lay a piece of foil over it. You don't have to crimp it down over the sides, but make sure that it's, covering the pie plate. And that'll help keep it from browning too fast. I've gotten in the habit of halfway through, so 25 minutes in, I take the pie out quick and put a piece of foil over it because it's just, I can't see. So there's no way for me to tell. But either way, this looks good. It needs to set for 2 hours before I eat it. Before you eat it, it needs to cool for 2 hours. So hopefully, whether you are buying your pie crust or making your own, hopefully you will enjoy this pie because the filling's easy to make one way or the other. So any comments or questions or anything like that, hit me up. It's littlemb6580 at gmail.com. Till next time, y'all take care.